In this video, we're going to look at how other hexoses other than glucose go through metabolism. And we're going to start with fructose. Fructose can be a major source of energy if you eat a lot of fruit or sucrose. And fructose has two different pathways based on where it is in the body. If it's in muscle can take fructose and uses hexokinase to directly make fructose 6-phosphate. If you remember, fructose 6-phosphate is one of the intermediates of glycolysis, so this can go directly into glycolysis. If we're in the liver, we have to use a different pathway. The liver has hexokinase homolog glucokinase. So it doesn't have hexokinase, and glucokinase can only work on glucose. So we have to do a few steps before our fructose is ready to go to glycolysis. The first step is to use ATP with the enzyme fructokinase and make fructose 1-phosphate. Then we have fructose 1-phosphate, and we have type B adolase. So we talked about adolase already in glycolysis. Type B is just another type of adolase that works on fructose 1-phosphate. And you're going to cleave fructose 1-phosphate into DHAP and glyceraldehyde. Then from glyceraldehyde, you have two different paths you can take. We're going to go on the first path to the left here, and that's what we're going to call step 3. You use another ATP to phosphorylate glyceraldehyde by glyceraldehyde kinase to make glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate can now go into phase 2 of glycolysis. Another pathway for this glyceraldehyde, however, an alternative pathway, is to convert it into glycerol using alcohol dehydrogenase. To do this, you need NADH to make glycerol. Once you have glycerol, glycerol kinase then can use ATP to make glycerol 3-phosphate. Then once you have glycerol 3-phosphate, you can reform your NADH using glycerol phosphate dehydrogenase to make DHAP, dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Once you're at DHAP, you can use triose phosphate isomerase to change that into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. And you might be asking yourself, why do we have this long intermediate pathway when we can go glyceraldehyde directly to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate? And that's because this intermediate pathway is making things that are used in the body. Glycerol can be used for fatty acids and glycerol phospholipids, so this alternative pathway allows us to make these other substances while still having the option available to us to make glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Now let's look at fructose and its effect on health. And in the United States, over the last 25 years, the amount of fructose that people eat had gone up roughly 10 times, tenfold. And the reason for this is high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is sweeter than sucrose, and it's really cheap to make. Now, the reason why this is a problem is because what we just saw is that fructose catabolism in the liver will bypass PFK. If you remember back to glycolysis, we were talking about PFK is your major control point for glycolysis. It's the thing that is controlling flux by having that substrate cycling. Fructose doesn't go through this control point, and so all the flux is either directed towards ATP, and if ATP is high, you're going to make lipids, because as we just saw, that fructose will go to make glycerol, and all the excess energy will go to make lipids as well. That's why there's this link between fructose and obesity, because when you eat a lot of fructose, you're bypassing your metabolism checkpoint, and you're going to make a bunch of lipids with it. On the other hand, you can have fructose intolerance. If you don't have that type B adolase we talked about, you're going to be intolerant to fructose, which means you can't eat it. The reason is that fructose 1-phosphate will start to accumulate in the liver, and you're going to deplete the amount of phosphate in your liver. The concentration of your ATP in your liver will drop, leading to liver damage. Fructose 1-phosphate also inhibits glycogen phosphorylase and fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, which are essential in gluconeogenesis, which we'll talk about later on. And eventually, this is going to cause hypoglycemia or blood glucose. However, people who are fructose intolerant, we call this self-limiting because usually you will develop a strong distaste for any sweet food, and so you kind of just manage it naturally by not wanting to eat anything that's sweet. So that was fructose. Let's move on to galactose. And galactose comes from the hydrolysis of lactose in dairy products. And glucose and galactose are epimers at carbon 4. Now, hexokinase will not work on galactose, so the first thing we need to do is epimerization reaction. You need to convert your galactose to a uridine diphosphate derivative. So let's take a look at how we can break down galactose. First, galactose is phosphorylated at C1 using galactokinase, as shown here, and we get galacto-1-phosphate. Once we have galacto-1-phosphate, UDP glucose can come in, and what's going to happen is that this UDP, uracil diphosphate, is going to be given to galactose to make UDP galactose, while this phosphate is going to be given to the UDP galactose to make UDP glucose to make glucose 1-phosphate. This glucose 1-phosphate can then goes through phosphoglucomutase to make glucose 6-phosphate in glycolysis. But let's go back to our galactose. So this galactose went through this reaction and made UDP galactose. Well, this galactose will go through an enzyme UDP galactose 4 epimerase to make glucose. So the glucose that we get sent in for the first round, all it's doing is that it's taking a uracil diphosphate from glucose and giving a phosphate to glucose to make UDP galactose. Once you're UDP galactose, then it can be turned into UDP glucose. Then that UDP glucose can go to glucose 1-phosphate and glucose 6-phosphate. So it's a little roundabout route for your galactose to go into glycolysis, but it will get there eventually. So if you cannot digest galactose, you get what's called galactosemia. And it's a genetic disease, and some symptoms of this are failure to thrive, and that just basically means you can't take on body weight or really develop, mental retardation, and death from liver damage. In most cases, a galactosemia is from a deficiency in the enzyme that's catalyzed our reaction 2 in the previous slide. And since you do not have this enzyme, you're going to get a buildup of toxic metabolic byproducts. And one way this can affect you, shown in this example, is that you have increased galactose concentration in your blood. Therefore, you'll get higher galactose concentrations in the lens of your eye. That galactose is going to be reduced to galactositol, which will lead to cataracts. So that's just one way that excess galactose can harm you. The way to treat this is the galactose-free diet, and that's actually not too hard to do because you don't actually need dietary galactose. Your body will get any galactose it needs by using glucose. And you need galactose for certain glycolipids and glycoproteins. So it is necessary, but your body will just use glucose if you don't eat it. Our last sugar is mannose. And mannose is a C2 epimer of glucose. And it can enter the glycolytic pathway after it's been made into fructose 6-phosphate, and this reaction is a simple two-step reaction. So luckily, hexokinase can work on mannose. So hexokinase will phosphorylate mannose and to make mannose 6-phosphate. Once you're mannose 6-phosphate, the enzyme phosphomannose isomerase will take your mannose 6-phosphate and convert it into fructose 6-phosphate. This mechanism is a lot like the phosphoglucose isomerase mechanism that we discussed earlier. And once you have fructose 6-phosphate, this is ready to go into metabolism. And so that's how we can deal with 3 non-glucose hexamers. And that's all for this video, and I will see you in the next one.